I like stacked my early freshman and sophomore schedule. So I was like going to class all day, every day. And then my junior and senior year, I had nothing to do. A cold call pitched Matt Kelly some fantasy article.
Last night, okay, I fell asleep right after I looked at my calendar, okay? And on my calendar, it said that we were recording the show, and I fell asleep and I had a dream about you last night. You were in my dream. I missed I was a half hour late to this recording for the show. And then in turn, I overcompensated. I got in my car. It was a very rainy day in my dream. And I drove to your house and we podcasted. We podcasted from my car.
I got bad news for you because I recently moved. We actually used to live pretty close to each other. So in your dream, you drove a long way because I live nearer to the beach now. So you drove a long way in your dream.
Yeah, right. It could have happened, before all of that went down. But yeah, it was I'm glad that didn't come to fruition today. I'm glad that I was on time. I made sure that I was on time because, you don't want
because you didn't have to drive to my house.
That's right. That's exactly right. Exactly right. I also was thinking about this because, again, I always try to think about my history with whatever guest is coming on. Sometimes it's guests that I don't know at all. I mean, obviously you and I know each other, but I think that we done a show together? Have we had more lunches / dinners together than podcasts?
There's a non-zero chance, for some of the Rotoworld stuff, we do the yearly Rotoworld drafts where it's segmented off. So maybe, I don't think so, but it's possible we are on something like that together.
Yeah.
That's all I could think of though. It's probably unlikely. So we have definitely had probably one of the very, very few people we've had more FaceTime, in-person IRL experience with than online experience. Cause most of my minutes spent with anyone in the industry is online. I'm not sure there's a person that's the answer is not yes for that, except for you and Matt Harmon, who we hung out with that same weekend in Canton.
That's right. Yeah. We sat you, myself, and Rotopat. We got it was an early dinner and we did it while watching the gold medal game for the USA team, the basketball team. And we sat there and we talked and I ate a salad, I remember, and we watched. It was a really, really high tea situation, eating salads and watching basketball, good time.
At some point we're in there talking about yeah, man, I don't eat meat and I have a gluten allergy. And oh man, these athletes are so cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Hope LeBron wins another gold.
Yeah. Although to be fair, everything did get picked up a lot when Steph just kept hitting three after three. That part was fun. But aside from that, it was not the highest tea, early. Not only that, but we were eating dinner. It was 4:30. It was 5 o'clock, not even 5. So it was even more insane of a situation. But Kyle, it's great to have you on and finally do this. Let's talk quickly. I like to do this with guests that hop on. Let's talk about your past and how you got to where you're at now with Rotoworld. Because I know that you spent time in a lot of different spots before, and ending up at Rotoworld.
I mean, you should know this better than anyone. I worked at Numberfire, not for long. Numberfire was probably one of the places I worked. I don't want to say the least, but just there were some places where they were we need work. And I was I will do anything. I was in college in 2018, if I had to guess. I was 19 or 20 years old. And I didn't have a lot to do. I stacked my early freshman and sophomore schedule. So I was going to class all day, every day. And then my junior and senior year, I had nothing to do. I was that was a pretty poor allocation of my time here. So I had nothing to do. So I just cold call pitched Matt Kelly previously on this show, maybe multiple times if I remember correctly. Some fantasy article. I don't remember what the first one I pitched was. He was oh, that's good. We'll work with you. And he published some of my stuff. Then I ended up working at RotoViz, at Numberfire, at a few DFS places, Rotoworld, Pro Football Focus. Sorry if I'm forgetting. If you're out there listening, you're I was your boss at this random fantasy website. How could you forget me? Worked at a lot of places. My apologies. And just eventually ended up doing enough at Rotoworld that they're you're destroying our freelance budget. Can you just work full time for us? And I was I can do
that. Right. Yeah. I do remember there were a lot of people that came through Numberfire, right? And I actually was like I wanted to like triple check myself and be like, Kyle wrote for us for a little bit. And I actually messaged Brandon Gadula yesterday. And I was I was like, I'm not crazy, right? Like I remember he was writing for us and doing stuff. It has nothing to do with like you, obviously. It's just that I at that point too, it was I was more hands off, and it was more
I was about to say, when I was going to describe what I did at Number Fire, I wanted to describe you as my boss, but you really would have been like my boss's boss, because it was like a team of really talented writers, most of which Gadula oversaw. You would have been like somewhere above that. So we maybe were on the same emails at some point, but I doubt you even sent me personally an email at any point. And I ended up, that was probably the final year, maybe I worked at Number Fire for 2 years, where I was working so much as a freelancer that it was a full-time job. And it was the season of 2020. And I was like, it's going to be a stable, normal season, 2020. And so I quit my day job to work just a ton of freelance stuff. And at some point they started delaying games. Like they kicked a few games to Tuesday. And I think we even had a Wednesday game. And I was like, oh boy, bad time to buy the top on them playing football every week. Luckily they played football every week. And after the season, I think that's when Rotoworld hired me.
Yeah. So I was glad that my memory like didn't completely crater there, and I did remember properly and correctly. But it was a lot different. Like when I have like Scott Barrett or Graham Barfield on, like I was, just doing everything on the editorial front at Number Fire when they were writing back in like 2014, 2015 and stuff like that. And then eventually Gadula took over that like day-to-day role, and I kind of just like pushed aside and did more of the content, more of the podcasting and stuff on my own before I ended up leaving. But Gadula's still over there, running ship, crushing it. Him and Jim Sonis. So it was I'm glad that you were part of that though in some way, because obviously you're a great analyst. So all right, let's talk about this fantasy football season so far. I'm curious what you think so far through 3 weeks. And I mean, the overreactions are out of control. Has it seemed like the overreactions have been like crazier this year than other years from people for you?
Yeah, I would say a little bit.
It's on par.
Well, I don't know, man. We love to overreact. It is our favorite thing. And it's weird because also as a content creator, like the smart thing to do is to be like, yep, these are all just pieces of the puzzle. Like I can tell you what happened in week 1. Like a big one was like the Rotoworld social team clipped us saying, me specifically, but all of us were in agreement. Like this is very, very bad for Ken Walker.
Yeah,
he was getting fewer carries than his teammate. And he immediately goes out and crushes the next week on fewer carries than his teammate. Yeah. And the comment section was just insane. But like, I could either sit there and say, like, I still think Ken Walker probably outcarries Zach Charbonnet over the course of the season. Like, we should hang to our priors because, like, 1 or 2 games of data are important, but they do not entirely describe what's going forward. But as content creators, like, this is what we're here to do, is, like, dissect in detail what has happened so far instead of being like, yeah, priors are important. We can still mention that, right? But we're here to talk about what happened. And so it's very hard to strike the appropriate tone of like, I'm very interested in what has happened through the first 2 weeks, the first 3 weeks, but it's hard to convey that those are tons of massive data points, but they're also just pieces of the puzzle, and they're not massive pieces of the puzzle. Our priors are still very impactful. I don't think the like just fantasy points per game starts beating ADP and predictiveness to like, I want to say it's like week 5 or 6. I've seen people post a good chart of that. So at this point, I do still think like priors are going to matter a lot. And so it's a weird balance to strike as a content creator. For me, the biggest surprise in terms of a more like slightly broad structural thing has been the round 2 wide receivers just being terrible. And especially because the profiles to me were pretty bulletproof last year, as in 2024, when we were taking Marvin Harrison Jr. at the 1-2 turn. Like I understood that was a pretty fragile bet. Like I made that bet. Like, look, I stepped on that rake. Don't worry. But I was like, I understand that not all rookies come in and look like we expect them to. We were not taking a rookie who we had never seen play a snap in the second round. The second round picks late in the summer, you got Puka in there. I wouldn't really count him mostly because like, come on, guys, grow up. Like imagine letting Puka fall to the second. But so for the second round picks, wide receivers for mostly the entirety of the summer, Brian Thomas Jr., terrible. AJ Brown finally gets a good game last week, but is not living up to just purely based on positional ADP. Ladd McConkey not living up to positional ADP. Drake London not living up to positional ADP. And none of those bets to me looked like bad bets they don't look like bad bets even in hindsight. I'm like, I feel like we appropriately priced all of these players. They're young, super productive, great peripherals, and it is just not mattering. I think there are some excuses and some things that could change for all of them, and it's not entirely their faults. The one that we'll talk about later, Brian Thomas Jr., is like the closest to being his fault. I mean, but Ladd too. Ladd is just like not earning a ton of targets on a team that Keenan Allen is fully revived on, that Quentin Johnson is taking another step. He deserves credit for improving massively from his horrific rookie year to a good second year to what looks to be a really good third year. Drake London dominating targets with terrible quarterback play. And like we mentioned, AJ Brown, like that team just does not want to throw the football, and they don't have to. They're winning.
Yeah. No, I like that answer a lot. Cause that's basically been like, I did a mailbag episode, technically will have been released once this is released, but I recorded it before, we recorded the show. And, I got a lot of questions about, Brian Thomas and about Drake London. And, if you look at history, I mentioned this on that show, and you look at just rookie wide receivers who scored 14 or more PPR points per game as rookies, right? Since 2011, there's been 12 of them, or 12 of them that had enough next season data. So like Kelvin Benjamin didn't play year 2, so he gets thrown out. And then we had 3 guys last year, Malik Neighbors, Ladd McConkey, Brian Thomas, who got there. 9 of the 12 scored 15 PPR points per game in their sophomore, their second season, which is an absurd hit rate, right? Like that is an insane in fantasy football to find a 75% of a certain cohort, even though it's this, not a massive sample. Like you would lean into that, 9 times out of 12, right? Like you would lean into that frequently, like all the time, because that.
Oh, don't worry. I did. Like, but to your point, the pipeline of really good rookies to really good throughout the rest of their career, it's a pretty straight shot. It is hard to veer off course. I mean, you just outlined the data, and it is not hard to see that if you look at it in other metrics too. Target earning, a yards per route run as rookies. Every metric that that we can say is like something predictive. When rookies do it, it is really predictive going forward. Yeah. And for some of these players, I think they'll course correct, right? But I don't know. It's shocking, truly, that they are all underperforming, and not just slightly. Like some of the second round running backs too are underperforming slightly. Like Josh Jacobs is like the RB19 right now, and Wynn is the RB10. Good volume. He'll probably end up getting there. But the wide receivers are just not even close to what we paid for. And to me, that is why it's the most shocking, is they're not just a little bit off. It hasn't been a mild disappointment. They are so far from what we paid for, and they historically have been such good bets. And like I said, I think some of them will bounce back. But at this point, like the bounce back has to start soon.
Yeah, right. I mean, like at some point, going back to like the overreacting, like you can't not react, as you noted. Like you have to react to some degree. And like when I kind of like I've noticed that I try my best to stay as level-headed as possible. And I think that people like often, like if you have subscribers or if you have people that are listening to your show, oftentimes the average fantasy football consumer and player and listener of podcasts and consumer of content, they're probably going to go through a larger roller coaster of emotion towards and about a player than you likely would as an analyst, because you as an analyst have seen this thing go on, year in and year out, so you have this backbone of like, okay, yeah, I've experienced this before with a certain player, or I know that things generally regress and all that kind of stuff. And so to me, like it's my job to at least stay level-headed for people, like to be that backbone for them. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that I'm not reacting to stuff. Like Chase Brown has fallen in my, rest of season rankings. Brian Thomas Jr. has fallen in my rest of season rankings. But to your point, the crazy thing with Brian Thomas, let's just get to that right now, because I did have a question about Brian Thomas Jr., on the show sheet. On the show sheet, I said on a scale from 1 to quite panicked, how panicked are you with Brian Thomas Jr.? The wide receiver position is just kind of a disaster right now in terms of after you get outside the top, I don't know, like 5 or 6, like there's not many that we are comfortably relying on right now. And so even with the way Brian Thomas Jr. has performed, I'm still like, is he like a low end 1 and high end 2 still, just from like where, the rest and how the rest of the position is performing. But I want to hear you out, because you said that of the guys you were talking about, you think that this is his fault more than the other guys, like Drake London having to play with Michael Penix and all that kind of stuff, and the way that they performed last week. So tell me how panicked you are about Brian Thomas Jr. Like, do you think that we're looking at a wide receiver 3 rest of season, or is it wide receiver 2, or do you think that he can get back to his wide receiver 1 status?
Oh, I mean, I definitely think he can get back. There are like two competing things going on. He's earning the ball a lot. And I think earning the ball is a very good proxy for talent, especially at the wide receiver position, but frankly, anywhere. But at the wide receiver position, he's still got a really strong target share, really strong air yard share, strong expected fantasy points, and guys who get thrown the football a lot. One, they tend to score because volume is a very predictive stat. But two, I just think it tells us a lot about their talent. And so that's great for him. On the other hand, like NFL's next gen stats has him as bottom 3 in yards after the catch over expected, bottom 3 in catch rate over expected, and bottom 3 sounds bad. It is so much worse when you realize he is the only one who sits there at the bottom with Xavier Legette. Like him and Xavier Legette are going band for band as the worst wide receivers in the NFL. And I think so these two things are competing, but our prior on his talent, like purely what you think of him as a good player, because of what you said about rookies who are productive in any sort of way you want to measure production, being typically very often very good, not only the next year, but just throughout the career, our prior should be relatively strong. That the micro talent X over expected YZ stats are going to be shaky in a small sample, and we should hang to our priors a lot on someone like Brian Thomas Jr. He is both horrific in the metrics and really not looking good when you watch him play. But the team does not care. They're trying to get him the ball just as much as they were last year. And we know that is at least our most important stat when we want to look at, like, how are you going to perform in fantasy? Do you get the ball a lot? That's usually pretty good. And like you said, wide receiver is pretty, part of the reason is guys like Brian Thomas Jr. underperforming. Right. But it's so ugly right now that guy who has not done a lot and is getting the football a ton still has to rank as like a top 15 weekly wide receiver. If he does this for the next month, of course we can continue to say, like, guess he's just not who we thought he was. But 3 games mostly isn't enough. My talent evaluation of him has come down. I would not have thought a player as good as 2024 BTJ would be capable of 3 games as bad as the first 3 games of 2025. But I don't think that means we need to throw out the pre-2025 talent evaluation. I still think we should lean on it pretty hard. So I 6.5 out of super worried or whatever the question was. That's what I'm at. 6.5.
6.5. I like that. I also think that the Travis Hunter storyline is kind of being downplayed when it comes to what that could do for Brian Thomas, and just having a floor of volume and not feeling as concerned about Travis Hunter maybe, overtaking a role, like a very, very significant role, in that offense. And then obviously, De'Ami Brown is banged up right now. Like in any other world, Brian Thomas right now is like everyone's favorite wide receiver from a fantasy perspective, because I do think conceptually, like the things that I'm seeing out of the Jags offense, I like, it's exciting, and they're scheming players open the way that they should. And we're seeing some of the concepts that we saw from Liam Cohen in Tampa transfer over into Jacksonville. They're just kind of not on the same page yet. They're doing stupid things. Wide receivers don't seem like they're in the right place. Trevor Lawrence hasn't played well, even in a clean pocket, and he's not being pressured at a very high rate either. So he should be playing better than he's playing. But I think that there's just like a possibility here that a lot of things are just all happening at once. And it's like a perfect storm for Brian Thomas to not produce. And that very soon we could see that turn around a little bit. So I'm with you. Like, I think 6.5 is a very good, maybe 6.6 would be my number, and just say that we should be a little bit panicked for sure. But I don't want to go too far in one direction, because look, we keep mentioning like rookie season peripherals and metrics and production metrics and all that kind of stuff. If you watch the dude too, no one disagreed with this. Like people, like every facet of the football world said Brian Thomas is, maybe there were some concerns about how complete he was as a receiver, and there was still some room to grow from like a route running perspective, but he still was a very very good player that no one would have really disagreed with. So I don't want to lose, hope just based on this 3-game sample. All right. Same question to you. You don't have to give me a number, but if you want to give me a number, I think numbers are fun. How worried are you about these Bengals skill players after what we saw in the first week with Jake Browning under center?
That's much closer to like an 8. Jake Browning's not good. Like, I'm sorry. Like, Godspeed for Jake Browning. I believe he got a contract extension like last offseason. Played I will say he played well with the Bengals in 2023. I think he went 4-3 as a starter, but weirdly, it did not manifest in any production for Ja'Marr Chase or T. Higgins. Both of them were banged up at the end of that year. They missed some time. They were out of the playoff hunt late in the season. Like, I think Ja'Marr Chase just left week 18 early because he was just done. So like when you look at his splits, they're going to be a little unfavorable to him. But the target share for Ja'Marr Chase in those games was around 22%. It was 25% last week. 25% is good. Yeah. It's also not what you spent the number one overall pick on, especially when it's 25% of Jake Browning's targets. And T. Higgins' target share in the games Jake Browning previously was something like 10 or 15%. And it's around that 10% as well. To me, like, Jake Browning is a good enough backup and that he can execute the very bare bones of an offense. But like, you didn't draft Ja'Marr Chase the 101 to be like, well, this is going to be the most bare bones offense in the NFL and I'm going to get about a quarter of the targets. So given that we have to say, like, what is the expectation going forward versus the price we paid to get these guys? Ja'Marr Chase 25% target share is still good. I still think they'll find ways to get him going. Yeah. T. Higgins, the concern is like a 9.5 out of 10. I just do not know if, and I think I do know if Jake Browning is capable of feeding him these difficult to complete but high value targets. I think I know the answer, and I think the answer is no. At least Chase can dominate at any level of the field, on screens, on deep stuff, middle of the field. Whatever Jake Browning is capable of, Ja'Marr Chase will be doing some of that. So Ja'Marr Chase is like a 7.5 out of 10 concern, mostly because I just don't think he's going to pay off ADP with Jake Browning as his quarterback, but I think he'll survive as a wide receiver one. T. Higgins, super insane, massive concern. I'm sorry, T. Higgins drafters. This ain't your year. Every 2 years is T. Higgins' year, and this is, of course, the other year. So doesn't look good. And I mean, Chase Brown, I don't think the situation can get worse than it has been because ESPN has them as the worst run blocking line in the NFL. PFF has them as like a bottom 5 unit as well. Of course, they have the backup quarterback in. I think we've seen maybe the worst 3-game stretch. But on the other hand, like, we've sort of lost the dead zone in that I think fantasy drafters have priced dead zone style running backs, if you want to call them that, pretty well over the past 2 years. Much better than we did in 2015, 16, 17. Yeah. But he was the prototypical dead zone where you're like, he's getting all the work. I don't know if he's that good, but boy, does he get all the work. Because his peripherals last year in terms of like PFF rush grade, yards after contact, breakaway rate, all had him around like 25th in the NFL. He was very Najee Harris in that capacity. And Najee is a really good running back if he plays on the best offense in the NFL and he gets all the work. Sure. We, of course, never really saw that for him. But if you told me Najee Harris, say he was the one who was the Chargers' lone starting running back right now, I'd be like, yeah, he's going to score a lot of fantasy points if they give him the ball a lot. And that's what we saw with Chase Brown last year, is they gave him the ball a ton, and he was solid on that. And when you're solid and you get the ball a lot, you're a clear RB1. This is not a good offense. It's not a good offensive line. And he's playing poorly enough that I'm not sure he will continue to get all of the work going forward. He is up there for that, like, he's probably like an 8 out of 10 concern, I'd say. But at least he still is getting all of the work, which is good. That matters a lot. It also matters that he's not playing well and the team is doing nothing to help him at all, obviously.
Yeah, no, I think the Chase Brown discourse has been really interesting this week because, you know, speaking of reaction and being reactionary and panicking, I've seen, you know, I got an email this week, I'm not even kidding, from someone asking if they should drop Chase Brown for Woody Marks. You know, like there's like that kind of dialogue going on right now and discourse going on. And like, that's the part where I'm like, guys, you need to relax a little bit. Like, to me, if you want to look at this as objectively as possible, you could argue that they faced one of the worst possible opponents in week 3 for their situation and circumstance, where the Vikings are coming off a loss. They're playing in Minnesota. We know the Vikings front can just be ferocious at times, and they're playing against his backup quarterback. They make these mistakes early in the game. Things just start to kind of crumble, as that and just sort of fall apart once that starts to happen. And so, like, when you think about it from that perspective, you're like, oh yeah, like this could just end up being, in hindsight, a bad game, a blip, right? The problem is that upcoming the next few weeks, they don't have the easiest schedule in the world for Brown. But I do think, would you say that he's just given the sentiment, and this is always hard because there's no like, this is the market, you know, but given the sentiment, do you think he's a sell low, or do you think that he's more of like a hold right now?
I think it's probably more of a hold, mostly because guys who are getting all of the work tend to score fantasy points. Yeah. He hasn't scored any fantasy points yet. If you gave me a bet of first 3 weeks PPR points per game or week 4 onward PPR points per game, which is higher? it's got to be week 4 onward.
Yeah.
Like, you can't get much worse than what he's done through 3 games. So I would say probably makes him a hold at that point. The offense is potentially has the potential to be so terrible that I'm not sure he's like a screaming buy. And like I said, he's not playing well himself either, right? Like, he's not making the most of a bad situation. It's possible that costs him work in the long run. I don't know if it's likely that it does, but it's at least possible, especially if the team is like, this is a lost season. I'm going to be honest. This is totally a lost season. When you lose, bro, like, hey, there's some great Nick Foles stories out there. Most of them are not great Nick Foles stories. Most of the time when you lose your starting quarterback, your season's just over. So I think there's not an impossible chance that like Taj Brooks starts to pick up a little more work down the stretch. Yeah. But I wouldn't call him a sell because I think this is at least like the lowest meaningful value he will have for the short to medium term.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at. I like, the expectation can't be his pre-draft cost or his draft day cost whenever they lose Joe Burrow. Like, that can't be the expectation. And if that is the expectation from someone in your league, then sure, like, that's not reasonable. But I still see, like, realistically, there are other running backs in the league who are volume-based running backs behind bad offensive lines in not desirable situations, and no one is like overly emotional about those players. But people are being.
It was Chuba Hubbard last year. I mean, I know Bryce Young turned it on in the second half, right? And he's doing a little bit of that this year. But over the past 2 years, even Chuba has just played on a truly dreadful team. Like, the Panthers have not been a good team. Their line, maybe, I mean, almost certainly is better than the Bengals are this year. But the quarterback play at times was quite literally the worst in the NFL.
Awful. Yeah.
And Chuba's good, right? But he's not a world beater, but he's still managed to overcome the bad situation because he's a good player who got all of the work. And I think that's at least like on the table, if not a relatively likely outcome for Chase Brown right now.
Yeah, same. And like, I don't think that, again, like, you nailed it, where it's like, I don't think anyone would say that Chase Brown is like a top 10 running back in the league, but if you're a top 20, top like maybe 15 type player in the league and you are in that offensive environment with Joe Burrow, it could be game over. Like, the ceiling is crazy, but without Burrow, then all of a sudden you're a pretty, above average running back in a not great situation. And like you said, we've seen this before. Players have been RB2s. I still think he can be that RB2. I wouldn't be like, so panicked that you have to sell low is basically where I'm at. All right, let's talk about Jaxson Dart, who's taken over the Giants quarterback job. Do you think that this, like, when you see stuff like this happen, are you changing your expectations dramatically for the pass catchers, or is it more of a wait and see thing for you?
I mean, in this case, with quarterback injuries, you go from Joe Burrow to Jake Browning. We should dramatically change things. Right. With Dart, it's a weird situation because Russ was playing fantasy-friendly football in that the Giants were just passing a lot, and he had one of the highest ADOTs in the league. Like, every play for the Giants was like, this is like 1.1 expected PPR points for Malik Neighbors because he gets all the targets, and these are just like Malik Neighbors down there somewhere throws. And those are really good for fantasy, even if it's ultimately a doomed prospect for the team actually trying to win games. So from that perspective, at least Russell Wilson was trying to get his fantasy pass catchers points. And as much as like I like Dart as a prospect a lot of prospects fail. Like, you look at Cam Ward was clearly a better prospect than him. The NFL evaluated Cam Ward as miles better. And you look at how much Cam Ward is struggling and you say, like, that's also pretty reasonable to expect Cam Ward to struggle. Yeah. Most rookie quarterbacks will come in and struggle. It is not normal for a rookie quarterback to come in and elevate his pass catchers. So I feel like to be reasonable, the most likely outcome is the passing output is worse. Like, if you look at the line movement for a team going from even Russell Wilson to their backup quarterback, like, bookmakers will still say the average rookie quarterback is really a sink on your team. It's just not fun in their first few starts, even their first entire season. But that being said, I do think, one, there is a like stylistic comparison of Dart was a super aggressive and pretty good deep ball thrower and intermediate thrower in college. Some of that is the system a decent amount of that is going to be the system he played in, but he rocked it in the system he played in. And it's the same types of throws I was talking about Russell Wilson making. These just super high value. You're going to gain a lot of yards and they're throwing them a lot type of stuff. And I just saw, I think it was Daniel Jeremiah saying he expects them to come out and play with a ton of pace, spread them and shred them type of stuff. It's exactly what they did in college because that's kind of the scheme he played in. So if Dart succeeds, I think the ceiling is really high. Yeah. Probably should have to have like reasonable expectations of most rookie quarterbacks are just not that good in their first few starts.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And not only that, like the Giants' weapons, I think at least complement each other really well. Like they have the right pieces around him. And they have, it's not like he's walking into a situation that would be as poorly or as poor or as bad as what Cam Ward is dealing with. Right. And I think at this point, say what you want about Brian Daboll, but I trust him more than Callahan in Tennessee and that coaching staff. So I am cautiously optimistic about Jaxson Dart. Like you said, we always have to bring it in a little bit because rookie quarterbacks tend to be more disappointing for fantasy purposes than exciting. But I said it before. I think that Jaxson Dart has sort of that like Josh Allen psycho mentality to him, and that's fun. Like it's at the very least, we're gonna see a very fun offense with him and like Cam Skattebo back there now with the Tyrone Tracy injury. Obviously, Malik Neighbors is a stud, so I'm very excited to see what they can do there.
Dart was a big runner in college too. He ran for you have to take away sack yards because stupid NCAA counts sack yards against you in rushing, so you got to find some database to strip those out. But he ran for like 2,000 combined yards over his final 3 seasons of college football. I think at least for him, he himself is a really fun super flex asset to have right now. Again, you have to kind of recalibrate your expectations for the pass catchers, but he himself should be like, I think he might just walk right into QB2 just based on rushing. The way Drake May did. Drake May was like a spotty hit or miss thrower as a rookie, but he was a runner as a rookie. And I think we could get that from Dart in the same way that like Josh Allen, even early in his career, was a really scattershot poor passer, but the rushing always kept him afloat.
Yeah, 100%. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. There's no better way to get closer to the action with DraftKings Daily Fantasy, the ultimate destination for football fans. New customers can play free for their share of millions in prizes with their first deposit of $5 or more. Download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app and enter promo code LATEROUND to play free for your share of millions. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, call 888-789-7777. 18 plus in most states. Eligibility restrictions apply. Ends December 31st. See terms at DraftKings.com/promotions. Now back to the show. All right, other rookies, these rookie running backs. We saw Omarion Hampton finally sort of break out in week 3. Now, obviously, Najee Harris's injury helped make that happen and help that happen. But I thought Hampton at least like started to look the part in that game. Finally, we saw him sort of like live up to what we thought we were drafting, when we got him, in like the middle of round 3. Do you think that there will be better days ahead for the other guys? So Treveyon Henderson, Ashton Jeanty, RJ Harvey, we'll go with those 3. We can go one by one with each guy. And if you want to talk about Caleb Johnson, feel free to talk about Caleb Johnson.
Look, there can literally not be worse days ahead for Caleb Johnson.
Yeah, there literally cannot. Literally.
Not possible. The worst game for a player, for especially like a young player, you will ever find is your like only or maybe your second only touch of the day is a kickoff you muff because you don't know the rules.
Yeah.
That, look, they could cut him. Like, it's not impossible. Yeah. But unless that happens, better days are ahead for Caleb, folks. Good news there. How much better? I don't, probably not that much better, but I mean, getting 0 touches would be better, and he's doing that right now. So, Treveyon Henderson, look, I get it, fantasy and bio. Why are they doing this to us? Like, you got to be kidding me. And to be fair to both Josh McDaniels and the head coach, Ramondre's played well. Take away the horrific fumbles, which is a staple of his game.
Right.
He actually has popped in all the nerdy metrics, and he looks good when you watch him. Like, he had that really nice catch that was supposedly designed for Treveyon Henderson 2 weeks ago, and he ends up being the one out there. I think it was because Treveyon Henderson was messing up consistently in pass pro. But you look at the 2 players, the active leaders in fumbles per carry, and they are both on this roster. They're Antonio Gibson and Ramondre Stevenson, and they did that thing they do. Stevenson fumbles twice. And of course, the frustrating part, they don't bring Treveyon Henderson in to replace Stevenson. They bring Antonio Gibson. Right. He does, of course, as fantasy and bio guys went, yeah, totally. He fumbled. Who could have seen this coming? Mm-hmm. I think after that, you have to give Treveyon Henderson more work. Do I think he will come out and just dominate all of the touches? I'm a bit skeptical of that. He didn't even dominate the touches in college, let alone something we'll maybe project him to never do in the NFL. But I do have to think that the role for him through the first 3 weeks is maybe going to not resemble in any capacity the role from week 4 onward. Do I think he'll come out and just start to, the way Bucky Irving just completely shut out Rachaad White from the lineup? I don't think that will ever happen for Treveyon Henderson as a rookie. But I think this is probably the lowest value you have. I mean, really, heading into last week was the lowest value you're going to have on Treveyon Henderson. I do think it'll get better from here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like, if you want to look at the positives too, like environmentally, the Patriots have not had any sort of pass catcher really emerge on that team. And that's obviously like Trevion's bread and butter, like where he can really thrive is get him out in space and let him do things as a pass catcher. And he brings that to the table that, Ramondre had that nice play, like you said, but that's probably the best receiving play that Stevenson has had over the last like year and a half, And so like that's what Treveyon can do. And if you drafted Treveyon, you did so knowing that the likely outcome is maybe a 50% running back rush share, maybe. Like that's the like we knew Ramondre Stevenson would be involved. It's just that we know that targets and pass catching and receiving is very, very important at running back in fantasy football. And if Treveyon Henderson could steal that 11, 12% target share and get up to that 15% mark as like a very staple part of that offense, then he would easily pay off at his even his increasing ADP that we saw. So he was like a floor play that had a ceiling if, they just decided to use him more in the ground game, than going with a guy like Stevenson. But I agree. I think after what we saw last week, we should see more Treveyon. Now let's go to Ashton Jeanty, who, the usage has been weird, and obviously the offensive line play has been horrible. But where are you at with Ashton Jeanty right now?
Yeah, you don't have to call it weird. The usage has been pathetic. Like, obviously he's getting a lot of the between the tackles work, but Ashton Jeanty was one of like 3 players drafted in the first 100 picks to have a single season yards per out run over 3 running backs. That is in the past 15 years. Like, he did not do a ton of pass catching in his final year at Boise State because, like, why the hell would you just hand him the football? And that's what they did. But the year before that, he was like a 500-yard receiver while still being a really efficient between the tackles player. He is, or I mean, at least in college, maybe that was all an aberration. Like, he was playing in the Mountain West or whatever, and none of that is replicable. But he is, at least in my mind, a really talented pass catcher. Yeah. And they just don't seem to think that, or at least they are concerned enough with something like pass protection that they are not willing to put him out there for passing downs, for the 2-minute drill, that kind of stuff. And the fact that they are just taking that portion of the fantasy production pie off of his plate entirely, and they're not replacing with like scheme targets that much either. It's not like they're doing, Alvin Kamara rookie year stuff where maybe he wasn't technically like the third down back, but Sean Payton loved to scheme his running back targets. They're not even doing that either. And the offensive environment looks really bad, much like Chase Brown, another team where between Pro Football Focus and ESPN's offensive line stuff, they're one of the 2 or 3 worst in basically every metric. The yard before contact, which is also in part a running back stat, but I do think it's a little bit helpful. He's worse in the NFL. He gets hit behind the line of scrimmage like every single attempt he gets. And then they're not letting us pad out the poor games with PPR production. Another spot where adjusting for the cost you paid to get him, maybe the most concerning of the rookie running backs, just because you needed him to come out of the gates as a top 14 back and then progress into a top 5 back, or maybe just stay as a top 10 back the entire year. But you needed some really strong production early and elite production late. And at best, you're probably getting like really good production late, but this role needs to change drastically to get to elite production. So I still think he can rebound, but like we're burning games quickly in which he is actively hurting you. I think almost certainly he'll go down as at least a small miss. And it's very possible that if stuff like this continues, it ends up being a big miss.
Yeah, what's funny is that my rankings were lower on Jeanty than consensus this year, and this is going to sound like a victory lap, but it is not, because the reason I had him lower was because of those wide receivers that we talked about earlier that we loved, and they obviously aren't coming to fruition. But the problem I think you nailed is that they're just not using him as a pass catcher nearly enough. Last week, long down and distance snaps, this is according to Fantasy Life data, 89% snap share on long down and distance downs for Zamir White. Like, what are we doing here? What is going on? You have a negative game script and you're going to be using Zamir White? Are we kidding? A guy who has literally never been a pass catcher at any level of reasonable football. Like, he was not one in college. He obviously has not really been one in the NFL. And we saw him perform last year, not to expectation too. You have to imagine that Jeanty's going to see more and more work, but this could easily be a situation where the coaching staff is like, yeah, we're going to slow play this because we can. And this is the way that we think we should be doing things, even though Jeanty probably should be getting the ball in more ways than he currently is. Another player who has disappointed at rookie running back is RJ Harvey. So where are you at with him?
Yeah, speaking of frustrating usage, the Jeanty one has to be more frustrating, but like this one's pretty frustrating too, because I get it. J.K. Dobbins was signed to do a specific thing, which is handle like bulk carries between the tackles, stuffed boxes, like short yardage stuff, and he's played really well. I don't need to bore you with all the data in terms of the rush yards over expected, his success rate, yards after contact. He's played really well, and he's earned the role he has right now. I don't think you should just it would even be too fantasy and bio for me to be like, we've seen too much J.K. Dobbins. He's playing really well. The frustrating and stupid part is the Tyler Beatty /Bidet usage, which I will note, finally quieted down in week 3. His role almost completely vanished in week 3, but that did not result in an increased route rate for RJ Harvey. There was like, hell, just put J.K. Dobbins out for those Tyler Bidet snaps. It makes me hopeful that when you cut one of these pieces out, that leaves room for RJ Harvey to pick that role up, even if he didn't pick it up last week.
Right.
But like, God, that's frustrating. And it it extends the timeline of like, here's when you're going to be starting RJ Harvey in fantasy weeks out from now, potentially. So I think this one is one of the most exciting potential because he's looked really, really electric. Another guy who really pops in all the metrics, largely because of one long run. But like, what are you going to do? Like, if you don't count the long runs, he doesn't look as good. Yeah, I know it doesn't look as good if you don't count the long runs. He did pop a long run, got 3 targets last week as well, a really high targets per route run. Hopefully they're trying to scheme him up a little more stuff, even if he doesn't actually hold that 2-minute drill type of role. But another one where you paid for at least some amount of early season production and you have gotten none of it. Like, he's not startable in week 4 on the role he has. And if he gets up to like 35 to 40% of the snaps, like 25 to 30% of the carries, still vaguely startable at most in week 5. So frustrating, albeit the talent does seem to be there. And we know Sean Payton's kind of a kingmaker for running backs. So I feel maybe the best about this one hitting in weeks, 12 to 17, the fantasy playoff push in the playoffs. But the fact that that's where we're at is probably going to make him go down as a slightly, if not meaningfully overpriced pick.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we're all learning and seeing firsthand. And I mean, we knew this going into the season that rookies tend to start slower and then they can come alive during the second half of the season. And that's part of the allure for them, is that that's the more important time of the fantasy football season. And even when you look at season long numbers and say, and see how well these guys like outperform ADP expectation. Even when you look at the season long numbers, rookies tend to look pretty good. I mean, especially a wide receiver, but even at running back. And so across the season, when we look back, I still think that some of these guys will look okay. Not all of them are going to just pan out and work, but like you said, Tyler Bidet not seeing the work that he saw last week. I agree. I mentioned that in the 10 Trends show this week, how it's nice to have a 2-headed monster instead of a 3-headed monster. Like, at least that tells us that maybe there's going to be one extra drive that RJ Harvey gets or something. And, he's able to just slowly get more and more work. And then obviously J.K. Dobbins hasn't been able to stay healthy throughout his career. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But Dobbins, obviously, rest of season, you have to, at this point, if you haven't adjusted, you have to have J.K. Dobbins ahead of RJ Harvey rest of season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is like a good reminder of like, we are not drafting players. We are building teams. And if RJ Harvey finishes from weeks 14 through 17 as a top 5 fantasy running back, he probably goes down as like a good pick from a 10,000 foot view, even if he does not outproduce he was drafted as the RB 25 and finished as the RB 36 type ADP. He goes down as a great pick. If you ate your vegetables and drafted a Travis Etienne, who got you there, and maybe Etienne fades down the stretch as Bayshal Tutin gets more work. Yeah. But like, I love drafting rookies because, like you said, the data generally supports that not only are they really good during the fantasy playoff push, but they're just generally at least a little bit undervalued. We've been drafting them more lately, but especially in your home drafts, pretty good value to just like keep drafting the rookies who seem like they're in decent spots, who seem like they're good prospects, and just hope for the best because it typically ends up being better than ADP suggests. Like, I love drafting them, but it would have been, and I try to do this much more this year, very smart to build out your roster to take advantage of those rookie hits, even if they end up just being a hit in weeks 10, 11, 12, or 15, 16, 17.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that I want to research more and like focus my writing more on this offseason, like in the draft guide, is talking about, okay, like for instance, I had, Torrey Horton as a late round dart throw, which is coming to fruition more. And by the way, we're recording this before the Thursday night game, but like as a dart throw, but like looking back, maybe that's a terrible example. Maybe if it's like, I don't know, a wide out, like, or even a running back like Bayshal Tutin, because, Tutin obviously isn't like getting it done yet, but a player that you might be able to just get later in the season in some way, whether cheap through a trade or off the waiver wire or something like that. Tutin's probably a terrible example, but a player that you could get later in the season or off the waiver wire, instead of using, a last round pick to draft that player, like, and then holding on to that player, because you can't assume that people are going to hold on to him. It might just be a better idea to, just wait on it and get those kinds of rookies. But at the same time, if you're not spending on some of these rookies, you are missing out on some of the guys who do end up, doing well. Like Puka Nacua was a late round dart throw in the draft guide when he was a rookie. And if you didn't draft him, you were fighting for him off the waiver wire with people, so it's this balancing act that I do want to look into more and more from like a usability standpoint of how we actually use these rookies within our team. Like you said, we're drafting a team, not these individual players. I think it's really, really important. All right. People really like whenever I ask like a this or that type thing. So we're going to do that here. We have like 8 of them or something. I'm going to say this player or that player, and you're going to tell me who you prefer rest of season more between these two guys. Okay. You ready to play this really, really fun game?
This sounds great. Right. Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do it. First one, Omarion Hampton, another rookie running back, versus Kyren Williams.
Omarion Hampton. I think really the Kyren Williams, like Omarion Hampton is just going to become the next Kyren Williams, and that like Hampton hasn't looked great through 3 games, and his profile was like the best aspect of his fantasy production profile coming out of college was like they give this guy a whole lot of touches. And that's what we care about. Like, at the end of the day, that is the best value you can have at almost any position is like your team trusts you to take 20 carries a game. That's a really cool thing in fantasy, even if he's not the best actual running back in the NFL. And Kyren was the poster child of that for 2 years, where like he ran all the routes, or was like pass pro for those routes too, got all the carries, got all the goal line work. His fancy metrics said he was kind of just an above average guy, but now we're actually seeing them mix in Blake Corum a little bit for some goal line work, for some more routes. Like both the snap share, the route rate, the carry share have all fallen for Kyren. He was the perfect player who cannot sustain even a small amount of drop and just overall cut of the pie. It's like Hampton, even if it doesn't work out, is probably similar to Kyren, and maybe he does turn things around. Maybe he is great, which I think is the bonus you get on taking him versus Kyren.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually surprisingly ahead of the market when I compared my rest season rankings to Fantasy Pros rankers this week on Kyren Williams, which hasn't always been the case. But I think part of that is just that, again, once you get into that like high end RB2 range, you start to get into like, okay, what are these guys? Like you have to place. So like a lot of it is just like the stability of Kyren. I still think there's going to be a floor, but I'm with you where, if you look at like Blake Corum's also looked really good, like very good. And so, when that's happening, he's losing some of that work. We know they don't target running backs at a high rate. I know that Kyren had that receiving touchdown this past week, but that saved his day in a way. And so, I'm at least a little bit concerned, but I still have him as like a low end one, high end two. But I have Omarion Hampton higher. Zay Flowers versus George Pickens.
I mean, Zay Flowers, this one wasn't even close to me. Like Zay Flowers is just a star. I think he's very clearly, he fits the bill. He wasn't quite as special. He wasn't as special as a Brian Thomas or like Malik Neighbors, but he was a good prospect who was good as a rookie and then gets meaningfully better in his second year, ups his targets per route run, his yards per route run, while also operating in a farther depth downfield. So he's earning more per route of higher value targets. He was the clear like upward trajectory toward, I don't even want to say superstardom, right? He still has probably another step to get there, maybe. But he was clearly just from the moment the NFL started considering him as a first round pick to week 1 of the 2025 NFL season, just consistent upward trajectory. Yeah. I get that the passing attack is probably not going to be as good, but I will just take the player who is right now dominating targets, super efficient, versus George Pickens, who's like, obviously CeeDee Lamb's not going to be there for a while. He should see a meaningful uptick in targets, but there's like a step forward Pickens has to take to be the fantasy producer that Zay Flowers is. All
right, let's go to Chase Brown, who we talked about earlier, versus Chuba Hubbard, who we also kind of indirectly talked about earlier.
I didn't realize that I made that connection without, maybe there was something in the back of my head. Chuba Hubbard, like, as we talked about, like, we've seen Chuba Hubbard quite easily survive a very bad offensive outlook. And I think at least it's going to be better this year. Probably still pretty high variance. Like Bryce has pretty shockingly low lows, but he has some legitimate high highs. I just think the offensive environment for a similar player is better for Hubbard.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. The thing that scares me a little bit with Hubbard is they are mixing in Rico Dowdle a little bit more. Like the last 2 weeks, Dowdle's had like a 35% running back rush share when it was like 12% week 1. And then weeks 1 and 2, Hubbard saved his day both weeks with this like late garbage time receiving touchdown. And both games were, it might have even been the same play, but he was like wide open on both plays and he ended up scoring. And so there is a little bit of that where I think you're right, where it's like RB2 type production, because there's just a lot of RB2s, like that's kind of, but like I doubt Chuba gives us that RB1 season, and there might be some inconsistencies there. But again, we already talked about how Chase Brown is sort of in that bucket too. All right, we'll go to J.K. Dobbins, who we just talked about, versus David Montgomery, who's coming off a ridiculous game against Baltimore.
I did not have a strong answer for this one. I went David Montgomery mostly because I think David Montgomery just is what he is. And that is a really good committee back on what turns out like obviously a really bad week one. Still one of the best offenses in football. And even being clearly behind J.K. Dobbins in terms of like what percent of your team's carries, what percent of your team's routes, all of the market share type stuff. Clearly J.K. Dobbins has the advantage there. You still have straight up just more expected fantasy points, no matter how you measure. Like if you're using PFF, so Rotoviz's expected fantasy points, Dave Montgomery comes in ahead of J.K. Dobbins because he plays on maybe the best offense in football. And you get in a lot of advantageous situations there. And there's at least a reasonable expectation that Dobbins' role is going to shrink going forward. I think the lines have probably proved that is not going to happen with the Gibbs-Montgomery split. They just like Montgomery too much. And he's really good at what they ask him to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, contingent upside too, right? Jahmyr Gibbs goes down, knock on wood,
he's
everyone
seriously
right now.
A top 3 fantasy running back if Jahmyr Gibbs goes down.
Yeah. I mean, everyone, please knock on wood. Everyone right now, please. We do not need Jahmyr Gibbs to go down. But yeah, we have to think about the upside there. Whereas J.K. Dobbins doesn't really have that kind of out. Okay, 3 rookie running backs. I think this one's really interesting to talk through. Cam Skattebo, Treveyon Henderson, Quinshon, Judkins. Who do you like most? You can even rank them if you want to rest of season.
Yeah. I think Skattebo, Quinshon, Treveyon, Henderson. I actually feel like clearly all of them are on the upswing right now. I will just say Skattebo right now is in a pretty good position to get all of the work, both carries and catches, on a team that without Tyrone Tracy has like they do not seem interested in giving Devin Singletary work. I mean, they don't even seem any more interested in giving Tyrone Tracy work. He's doing the thing that like Ramondre does, where, man, every chance he gets, he makes you want to play the backup if you're a head coach. Like he has had fumbling issues. He's had drops issues. He's not good in pass pro. And of course, he's hurt right now. And Skattebo looks really good too. Not to say that like we don't think Quinshon and Treveyon Henderson are going to look good. You're telling me Skattebo ranks really well in PFF. I think he's like PFF's 3rd ranked running back right now. And he's getting all of the work. I'll just that feels like I'll just take the one who has pluses in all categories, where I do not know if Treveyon Henderson is going to get all the work. And he hasn't looked as good as Cam Skattebo. It's a small sample. I still think we should expect him to be a better player. But right now, the combo of work plus looking good is both the most in favor of Skattebo because he's going to be a pass catcher, but also really does favor Quinshon Judkins as well. He came back and just immediately took over the backfield. Yeah. He was immediately getting the majority of the carries in his first game back from not practicing almost the entire summer. And then the next game, he almost completely shuts out the rest of the running backs. Dylan Sampson doesn't appear to have any bit of a role anymore. Jerome Ford is just out there for pass catching. The only flaw in the Judkins profile is that he probably is limited to primarily between the tackles work on a team that I believe is 10-point underdogs this week. And they're going to be, this will be a crazy underdog situation. They, I believe, are road tripping to Detroit. I know they play Detroit. I think it's on the road. They won't play one of the best teams in football on the road every week, but they will be underdogs every week. And that makes Judkins a very, I hope he gets in the end zone because he's just not going to catch enough passes. But who knows? They could also just start playing him on passing downs too, because he was an okay pass catcher, perfectly acceptable pass catcher in college too.
Yeah. I kept comping him to just from a usage standpoint to Jonathan Taylor whenever he was coming out. It's not to say that he was as good of a prospect as Jonathan Taylor, but in terms of he could be a 9 to 10% target share player. And then obviously, JT's seen his workload and stuff even get better this year. But regardless, the reason I brought them up is because in my rest of season rankings, they're basically all in the same tier for me. Mm-hmm. But I think it's one of those situations where it's what do you need for your
I know that was what made the question so hard. Go ahead. Yeah, that was my first thought is I can think of different teams I have where I'm glad to have one player and I wish I had the other.
Yeah, I think Henderson's probably the stash candidate of the 3, the highest upside candidate, right? Because, Tyrone Tracy is going to come back eventually and there could still be more of a split backfield. But if you need that production right away, I'd go Skattebo. And then in between the two is kind of Quinshon Judkins, right? And so that's kind of why I wanted to see if they're, but I'm glad it seems like we're on the same page of just these are guys who all do different things for your fantasy team, depending on what you need for your squad right now. All right, let's look at DK Metcalf versus T. Higgins.
Oh, man. Neither. Metcalf, I think. The answer is Metcalf. I will say that the Steelers are kind of interesting in that, I think Rodgers is 75 to 80% cooked, but every once in a while he does do something really cool. There are brief flashes where his old man strength surges to a truly incredible peak Rodgers-esque play. The valleys between them are just pretty stunning, but they are also playing at a relatively neutral pace and a neutral pass rate over expected, which is they're finding some sort of probably relatively unhappy, but some sort of medium between the type of football that Aaron Rodgers wants to play, which is pass heavy but super slow, and the type of football that Arthur Smith wants to play, which is the most run heavy in the NFL. The fact that that volume in theory is there for guys like Metcalf or the tight ends or Calvin Austin, as opposed to there was a scenario in which they were the most run heavy and slowest team in the NFL. That has not, come to pass. So there's at least like some meat on the bone for Metcalf. These are both bad. I don't like these. Yeah, no,
it's tough because I don't think Metcalf, I think he's proven at this point, he's not a target earner. He's just not going to be that, like, because the way that he was going to really pay off this year was if he was like a 28% target share player, right? And I think we're seeing that. I don't know if I were to project rest of season target share for him, 22%, maybe something around there.
I mean, quite literally just the same as any other year of his career.
Yeah, right.
He played with some good players. Like obviously he played with JSN, who didn't break out until like the second half of DK's final season. Played with Tyler Lockett, who's really good, even if it was towards the tail end of his career. But he proved there, at least, there was a chance he didn't, but it turns out that the guy's target share was pretty stable with him as a player. In the same way that like player ADOTs have a surprising amount of stickiness year to year, because the guy runs a similar route tree last year as he did this year. DK Metcalf is no more laterally agile than he was 5 years ago as he is today. Like there are just certain things he's not capable of, and that limits his ability to just go out and be like, every third play is a target to DK Metcalf.
Yeah, 100%. All right, this is a fun one. Caleb Williams versus Daniel Jones.
Look, I'm picking the fell for it again award, Daniel Jones. Like this time it counts. He's finally good. But Caleb was really awesome last week. As of right now, that's week 3, but he's still on the year. Like we can't just say like, well, the last thing he did was pretty awesome and not ignore the fact that in the first 2 games, he was pretty terrible. On the year, he's 15th in EPA per play, 25th in completion percent over expected. PFF has him as one of the least accurate quarterbacks in terms of accurate throw rate. Daniel Jones is crushing all of that stuff. And like, if it's a gimmick, I'm fine with that. And saying that like they're running right now a ton of play action, a ton of RPO. They're generally keeping him clean pocket too. All of this stuff has worked in the favor of Daniel Jones. But I also don't see why that stuff wouldn't persist. Maybe it comes down, right? Like maybe they aren't the most play action heavy or RPO heavy team in the league going forward. But it's not like they had the world's easiest schedule, right? Like one of their wins came against a really good Broncos team in which he played really good football against those Broncos. And maybe if you want to just say like this is all like too pie in the sky stuff, they're using Daniel Jones as a goal line running back. He has one fewer carry inside the 5 than Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. So if you think Caleb is better, perfectly acceptable. I don't want to be the one going to bat for Daniel Jones. Yeah. But if for fantasy purposes you need the very clear tiebreaker, it's a guy who's like a goal line running back.
We get it. You love Daniel Jones and you think he's the best quarterback in football.
It's not fun. Man, he's playing really well though.
He is playing well. Yeah. It was crazy. I was like, his pressure to sack ratio right now is by far, not even close, by far the best in the league, which is crazy because 2 years ago that he was horrible within that metric. And we know that that's often a quarterback type metric, from a stickiness standpoint. I'm going to put this out there into the universe. I think this game this weekend against that Rams front is going to be the most interesting test for me with Daniel Jones, just to see how that offense is able to handle more pressure. Like you said, they played well against Denver, so I don't want to, say that they haven't faced anyone, but they're on the road. It's just going to be a really interesting matchup in my eyes. I'm not saying either way, like I'm just kind of living in the middle with Daniel Jones, which is a really, really very much a cop-out type answer. And I like Caleb a lot just because of that environment that he's in. Like he's scrambling a lot, he's got the weapons, and their defense is absolutely putrid. So I'm excited about like what that upside might look like, but I understand if people want to go Daniel Jones with this one. Last one, I think this one's fun too, because Travis Kelce's been doing what he's doing, which is not a lot. And then Juwan Johnson has had insane usage, but Juwan Johnson versus Travis Kelce, who do you want rest of season?
I didn't like for a lot of these. Obviously, it came with a lot of stats. I was like, I don't need stats. Travis Kelce is so washed. I mean, you could look. He's on pace. So I have some stats. He's on pace for like career worst in yards per outrun, targets per outrun, PFF receiving grade. Last year was his worst year in yards per outrun. Yards per outrun. Yeah. Year before that, worst year. Maybe until like his first or second year. He didn't actually play his first year. But 10-year lows basically across the board. 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and this year. Like there is no more obvious player in decline in the NFL right now than Travis Kelce. And he has the benefit of not having a single pass catcher of note to compete with right now, because Xavier Worthy's played, like 3 snaps or whatever it was, and Rashee Rice has not played a snap yet. So things are only getting worse from here, and he's barely doing anything. Whereas Juwan, like it or not, is one of the highest usage tight ends in the NFL.
Awesome.
His usage will probably fall, because our prior should be that he's not the best target earning.
That he's not Trey McBride.
Yeah, that he's not Trey McBride. And if he falls to just Hunter Henry, he will probably still outscore Travis Kelce.
Yeah.
And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. He probably will continue to earn targets at a good clip, even if not Trey McBride clip. I didn't even have to think about this. It was very clearly Juwan.
Yeah, I found myself every week since week 1 being higher than the market considerably with Juwan Johnson, just because, I mean, what more could you ask for from a usage standpoint? And the Saints are playing in these negative scripts. They play at a fast pace. The Saints are actually not a horrible environment for fantasy because of that, and because of the passing volume that we might be able to see there. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is, I mostly wanted to just bury the Travis Kelce talk at this point and just not have to do it anymore. So thank you for doing that. All right. Few more questions. Favorite buy candidate right now for the rest of the season.
I mean, you just mentioned how good the Saints environment is, and mine is Chris Olave. He is the number 1 receiver in expected fantasy points. He is, in terms of PPR expected fantasy points, the number 3 overall flex player, behind only Christian McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs. Like you said, I get the Saints are not going to throw the football particularly efficiently, but they're going to have to do it a lot, and they are leaning into that as a fast-paced team. That is, I mean, at worst right now, you're getting PPR scam. The targets aren't that great in terms of accuracy, but there are enough of the targets to support wide receiver 2-ish production. But if he just comes close to living up to just capturing the equity of the volume he has, he is quite literally, if he comes close to that, he's a top 5 fantasy receiver, because he's seeing the ball more than any other player in the NFL. And we have, I think, a pretty strong prior that I think he's really good. He's another player who you talk about, comes into the NFL immediately, I think 1,100 yards, 2+ yards per route run in back-to-back seasons to start his career. I am very confident, at least I'm reasonably confident, that he is at his core a very good real-life football player. And now the team is just pumping him with volume of the likes we have never seen before for him, and we're not seeing with anyone else in the NFL. And he just hasn't made good on it. And maybe he never will, because maybe he's not as good as I think he is. And of course, his quarterback play is pretty poor. But when we're getting as much volume from a player I think is as good as I think Olave is, and he hasn't lived up to the expectation yet, I feel like that is the most obvious buy signal. Yeah, love that. How about a sell candidate? We talked about him earlier. This one I think you could lump into a lot, and maybe fantasy has advanced too far for this to be a viable strategy. But in the vein of J.K. Dobbins or Ramondre heading into last week, obviously he's not high anymore. But I had Travis Etienne. He is just greatly outkicking the coverage in terms of his efficiency and what the volume says he should be getting. And I think that's fair to say he probably will do that to some degree. This Liam Cohen offense is super friendly to getting running backs fantasy points, but he's 22nd in percent of team carries, 25th in route rate, but he's a PPR RB9. And also total slappy move. Bashal Tutin looks good, man. Bashal Tutin looks really good. And he didn't play a ton last week. He still plundered a short yardage touchdown. He didn't play a lot last week, I think because he's dealing with the shoulder injury that I would assume they're kind of protecting him from. But every time he gets on the field, he looks great. I think he will force a true 50-50 committee, I don't know, by week 10 or something, at which point Travis Etienne probably falls back closer to that RB20 range. Still a good fantasy asset, but right now he's easily outproducing that. Yeah, I mean, look, I mentioned this in the mailbag. It's not even released yet at the time of this recording, but that is a play. Someone asked me about Travis Etienne, and my answer was he's outside the top 20 in every volume related metric that we care about. You're looking at rush share, you're looking at route participation, and so on and so forth. And he's clearly outperforming how he's been used. And last week, he scored a touchdown because the Texans let him score a touchdown. It happened at the end of the game. They let the Jags score so they could get the ball back. He should have just fallen down on the one, and they talked about that after the game. And I am a massive Bashal Tutin stan, and so I am a believer that he's going to steal more and more work as the season goes on. And it's been wild to me looking at, because again, I create my rest of season rankings and I just compare it to how other people are ranking, because then that way I can say, hey, I'm higher or lower on this player. Travis Etienne this week has consistently been at least a high end 2 for people, high end RB2, whereas I have him more in the RB20 range, like you mentioned. And so I am definitely more in the sell camp for Etienne. So
Very funny / not surprising that we have agreement with both the buy and the sell candidate. All right, the last question before I let you go. I do this with every guest during the season. Give me a fire prediction for week number 4.
Ladd McConkey, we talked about him earlier. It's been frustrating. And look, I don't know if it'll change over the course of the season, but week 4 looks like an absolute smash spot for Ladd McConkey. I'll say 150 yards and a touchdown. This is the breakout spot we've been waiting for.
Are you a believe? Like, how would you rank those 3 wide receivers rest of season? Because there was a viral tweet going out that the ESPN guys had Ladd third of the 3. All 3 of them did. And this is not, I love all 3 of those guys. This is not, they could easily be right. So I'm not saying anything negative about how they rank them, but how would you rank because I don't have it in that order, but how would you rank the Chargers wide receivers rest of season?
No, they're super nice people. And like, sometimes you just disagree with nice people.
Yeah, you just disagree with it's fine. Yeah, right. Exactly.
But I do. The thing is, I do. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I'm not falling for this. I don't want to say nonsense because both Keenan Allen and Quinton Johnson have legitimately played well. Like, I don't think they're doing anything that like they don't deserve. But like I said earlier, there's this very tricky tightrope to walk of our priors coming into the season versus 3 weeks of data. And to me, the 3 weeks of Ladd being disappointing, but not atrocious. Like, Brian Thomas Jr. has been atrocious. I still have faith in Brian Thomas Jr. He's played like garbage.
Yeah.
And Ladd has not played like that. Even in week 1, he had a deep ball that Justin Herbert just missed him on. And if he hits on that one play, I am confident we are not talking about him in the same way that we are right now. I would rank them Ladd, Keenan, QJ. Credit to QJ though. Like, I did not think he was a good prospect. I felt very vindicated when he played poorly in his entire rookie season. He's a legit good football player. I think the targets just have to go somewhere, and I'm still confident that Ladd is the most talented of them. And Keenan is really quite a good fit for what Justin Herbert is doing. Anytime he doesn't want to look deep, Keenan's there and he's open. But I'm still going to cling to the fact that Ladd's rookie season was so elite that he will bounce back. Great spot versus the Giants, too. The Giants have given up more yards and targets to slot receivers than any other team in the NFL right now. And of course, Ladd's running about 63, if I remember correctly, % of his routes from the slot. So to me, just very clear spot where, again, I don't know if he lives quite up to my very lofty expectations for him, but week 4 actually strikes me as a game where he does.
Ladd McConkey smash. I love it. Kyle, this was great. Let everyone know where they can find you, what you're working on, and what they can expect from you rest of the season.
Find me. I try and keep up with tweeting all my stuff out on Twitter at Kyle Tweets Here. But if not, always on the Rotoworld football show and always dropping like a few weekly articles on Rotoworld.
I can't believe that we didn't mention Denny Carter once on this show, where you are one of the rare people that actually get to experience doing a show with Denny consistently, and the how awful that experience can be.
Look, we've developed a system where anytime Denny says something we don't like, we just make fun of him or we mute his mic. And then at the end of the show, we're like, it wasn't that bad of a take, for being honest. But we don't concede that until the joke has fully run its course.
Yeah, Denny. I mean, especially on Living the Stream, because Living the Stream is not. I mean, it's basically not even a football show, fantasy football show anymore. But the kinds of things that he's said in the past have made my jaw drop many times. But I love him for it. You can find all my stuff over on lateround.com. Make sure you're subscribed to the Late Round Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and also subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@LateRoundFF. Thanks for listening, everyone. Greatly appreciate it. Have a great weekend. And thanks for tuning in.